I sat on the couch staring at the TV like I cared about the game. I didn't. It was just noise, something to fill the silence in the room while Emily cleared the dinner plates from the table. Roast beef, her specialty. I used to look forward to these moments, the casual comfort of a meal at home, the kids playing in their room, and Emily bustling around the kitchen. Now, I was just off. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. It started with little things. Her laugh didn't sound as genuine. She was always distracted. I tried to push the thoughts aside, telling myself I was being paranoid, that it was just stress from work. But that gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was wrong. Emily used to make eye contact when we talked. Lately, her eyes glazed over, like she wasn't really listening. She'd nod, respond, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. I told myself it was normal after 10 years of marriage. People grow comfortable, routines become dull. But this was different. It wasn't just boredom, it felt like distance. She'd been staying late at work more often. I joked about it, but inside I couldn't shake the suspicion that something was up. One of her coworkers, Greg, had a weird vibe about him. Every time I'd met him at office parties, he was a little too friendly, too close. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now, the thought of him lingering in her office when I wasn't around started gnawing at me. I dismissed it. I wasn't the jealous type. Never had been. Emily wasn't the kind of person to do something like that, or so I thought. But it wasn't just her behavior. It was how she acted around the kids too. She used to be all in, playing games with them, helping them with their homework. Lately, it was like she couldn't be bothered. Our daughter Lily had come home with a drawing she'd made, something she was clearly proud of, and Emily barely glanced at it. That wasn't her. I felt a pang of guilt for even thinking it. I mean, she had a lot on her plate, work, the house, the kids. But that night, as we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but notice how disconnected she was. It was the same meal we'd shared 100 times, the same conversation about our day, but it felt forced. Like we were playing house instead of living in one. It was a joke from a friend that started it all. He was over for drinks a couple of weeks back, and we were talking about kids, the usual dad stuff. He looked at Lily and said, "She doesn't look a thing like you, man. Got her mom's everything, huh?" I laughed it off, but after he left, the words stuck with me. I mean, Lily and Jack were both great kids, but now that I thought about it, they really didn't look like me. Maybe I was overthinking it. I tried to shake it off, but once that seed was planted, I couldn't ignore it. I found myself staring at them the next morning over breakfast, studying their faces. Lily had Emily's big brown eyes, her fair skin. Jack, the same thing. No one ever mentioned them looking like me. Not once. It was a ridiculous thought. I shook it off. But as the days passed, that small joke began to fester. It turned into something bigger, something I couldn't ignore. I knew what I had to do. No point in wallowing in doubt, right? I'd always been the kind of guy who tackled problems head on. This was no different. I didn't hesitate. A DNA test would settle it once and for all. I ordered one online that night, kept it quiet. If nothing was wrong, no one had to know. It would just be a little reassurance for me, something to stop this madness from eating me alive. While I waited for the test to arrive, I tried not to act any different around Emily, but it was hard. Everything she did seemed suspicious now. The way she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. How she suddenly had so many work dinners. I started paying closer attention. Little things, things I never would have noticed before, like how she'd leave her phone face down on the table. She never used to do that, or how she'd smile at a text, then quickly swipe it away. I didn't ask, not yet. I was waiting for something more concrete. The test kit arrived 3 days later. I waited until Emily took the kids to school before I swabbed the inside of their mouths. I hated doing it. Felt like I was betraying them somehow. But I needed to know. I couldn't live with this uncertainty. I dropped the test in the mailbox that afternoon. Now it was just a waiting game. In the meantime, I went through the motions. Work, home, dinner, repeat. But the weight of it all was pressing down on me, and I started to feel like I was living a double life. On the surface, I was the same dad, the same husband. Underneath, I was barely holding it together, waiting for the moment when my entire life could come crashing down. I started noticing more cracks in the facade. Emily and I barely spoke anymore, except for the necessary day-to-day stuff. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd give me these short, clipped answers. No details, no warmth. When I'd press her for more, she'd snap, saying she was tired or stressed. That's when I knew something was definitely wrong. One night, after the kids were asleep, I tried to talk to her, really talk to her. I asked her if everything was okay, if there was something bothering her. She looked at me with this blank expression and said, "I'm fine. Why do you always have to make a big deal out of nothing?" It hit me then. I was making a big deal out of nothing. At least, that's what she wanted me to believe. But I couldn't let it go. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt in my gut for weeks. I didn't argue with her. I just let it slide. But inside, I was fuming. She was lying to me. I could feel it in my bones, but I wasn't going to confront her without proof. Not yet. The results were supposed to take about 2 weeks. It felt like the longest 2 weeks of my life. Every day that passed, I found myself growing more distant from Emily, more suspicious of every move she made. I kept my cool around the kids, but I could tell even they were picking up on the tension. Jack asked me one night if I was mad at Mommy. That hit me hard. "No, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Just tired from work." But I wasn't tired. I was on edge, and that edge was getting sharper every day. When the email finally came through with the DNA test results, I didn't open it right away. My hands were shaking. I sat there for a few minutes just staring at my phone, knowing that whatever I was about to find out would change everything. Just as I was about to open the email, my phone rang. It was Emily. "Hey, I'm running late," she said, her voice rushed, like she was nervous. "I'll be home soon." That was strange. She was never this vague. I could hear something in the background, too. Voices, maybe music. A lump formed in my throat. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, just out with some coworkers," she replied quickly. "I'll explain later." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone again, my heart pounding. Something was definitely wrong. The call from Emily had rattled me, but I wasn't going to let it show. I put my phone down, staring at the unopened email like it was going to explode. The DNA results were just sitting there, one click away, but I couldn't bring myself to open them, not yet. My mind was racing, replaying that phone call. Something wasn't adding up. Out with coworkers? She sounded too nervous, too rehearsed. And that background noise, voices, music, didn't fit the work dinner excuse. I paced around the living room, glancing at the clock. It was late. Normally, Emily would have been home by now, sitting on the couch with me, scrolling through her phone like always. But tonight was different. The uneasy feeling that had been building inside me for weeks was now too loud to ignore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Sitting back down, I grabbed my laptop and opened it. If she was lying about her whereabouts, there had to be a way to track her. I remembered she had shared her phone location with me months ago when we were trying to coordinate pickups for the kids. I hadn't thought about it since then, but now it might give me the proof I needed. I pulled up the location sharing app, and there it was. Her dot. But it wasn't anywhere near the restaurant district where she'd claimed to be. She was across town near the water, at some bar. My heart pounded in my chest as I zoomed in on the location. Brady's Pub. A dive bar, the kind you don't go to with coworkers after a long day at the office. It didn't take a detective to figure out what was going on. She was lying, plain and simple. But I wasn't about to jump to conclusions without more evidence. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was with friends, unwinding after a tough week. But deep down, I knew. This was more than just a night out with coworkers. This was the kind of thing that didn't make sense unless you were hiding something. I grabbed my jacket and keys. I wasn't going to sit around and wait. I had to see it for myself. The drive to Brady's Pub felt like it took forever. My mind was spinning, replaying every moment from the past few weeks. The late nights, the cold shoulder, the way she barely looked at me anymore. It all pointed to one thing, and as much as I wanted to be wrong, I knew I wasn't. When I pulled into the parking lot, I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. The bar looked dimly lit, a few cars scattered outside, none of which I recognized. I scanned the lot for her car, and there it was, parked off to the side. My stomach twisted into knots. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't sure what I was about to walk into, but I was ready to face it. I got out of the car and headed toward the entrance. The bar's neon sign flickered above the door, casting an eerie glow on the pavement. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Then I pushed it open. The smell of stale beer and cheap cologne hit me as soon as I stepped inside. The place was dark, filled with groups of people talking loudly over the music. I scanned the room, searching for Emily. My heart was pounding in my ears, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, and then I saw her. She was sitting at the far end of the bar, laughing at something the guy next to her was saying. They were close, too close. His hand was on her knee and she wasn't pulling away. My blood ran cold. I felt a surge of anger rise up in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to think. I needed to be smart about this. I stepped back out of the bar, my head spinning. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just seeing her with another guy. I needed something solid. Something undeniable. So I waited. I sat in my car, watching the entrance, waiting for her to leave. I had to know how far this went. It was over an hour before they finally came out. They were laughing, stumbling a little, clearly tipsy. The guy had his arm around her, and she didn't seem to mind. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. This was it. This was the proof I needed. They got into his car and I followed them. I kept my distance, not wanting to tip them off, but I didn't lose sight of them. They drove across town, finally stopping at a hotel. Of course. The final nail in the coffin. I watched as they walked inside arm in arm, like they didn't have a care in the world. I sat there, staring at the hotel entrance, my mind racing. This was real. It wasn't just paranoia. She was cheating right in front of me. All the signs I'd ignored, all the little things I'd brushed off, they were all pointing to this moment. But I wasn't going to storm in there and confront her. That wasn't my style. I needed to be smarter about this. I needed evidence, something concrete that would leave no room for her to weasel out of it. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of them walking into the hotel together. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I drove home, my mind was already working through my next steps. I'd seen enough to know that she was lying, but I needed more. I needed to dig deeper, to gather everything I could before I made my move. This wasn't going to be a quick confrontation. I wasn't going to let her turn this around on me and play the victim. I'd seen that look on her face when she lied, the way she twisted things to make me seem like the bad guy. Not this time. The next morning I was up early, long before Emily even stirred. I needed to get into her phone, see who she was texting, who she was calling. It wasn't easy. She'd started being more careful, keeping her phone locked and face down, but I knew her passcode. I waited until she went into the shower and then made my move. I scrolled through her texts looking for anything suspicious. It didn't take long to find it. There were dozens of messages between her and some guy named G. My stomach churned as I read through them. The flirting, the plans to meet up, the lies she'd told me about where she was going. This was more than just a fling. It had been going on for months, maybe even longer. I took screenshots of everything, sending them to my own phone. She wasn't going to talk her way out of this. Later that day, I decided to confront her, but I knew I had to be careful. If I came at her too strong, she'd get defensive, spin the whole thing like I was paranoid. I'd seen her do it before, twist the truth until it suited her. So I played it cool. I waited until after dinner, when the kids were in bed. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, her face instantly guarded. "About what?" I didn't waste any time. "About where you were last night." Her eyes flickered with something. Fear? Guilt? It was hard to tell. "I told you I was with coworkers." I shook my head. "I know where you really were. I followed you to Brady's. I saw you leave with him." For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right lie. But there wasn't one. Not this time. "You followed me?" she finally said, her voice rising in pitch. "That's insane, Dan. What the hell is wrong with you?" I stayed calm, refusing to take the bait. "Don't try to turn this around on me. I know what's going on. I've seen the texts, the calls. I know everything." Her face went pale. For a split second, I saw the truth flash across her features. She knew she was caught. But instead of admitting it, she doubled down. "You're out of your mind," she spat. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong." I shook my head, standing up and pacing the room, keeping my cool. "Don't lie to me, Emily. I've got the text. I've got photos of you going into that hotel. It's over." She stood up too, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice shaky now. "He's just a friend. It's not—" "Don't." I cut her off, my voice hard. "Just don't. I've seen enough. You can save the excuses." She sank back onto the couch, her hands trembling. "Dan, please." But I wasn't listening anymore. I turned and walked out of the room, her voice trailing behind me. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me this time. I had everything I needed. The next move was mine. Over the next few days, I gathered more evidence. I hacked into her email, finding even more messages between her and G. There were photos too, ones I wished I could unsee, but they only solidified what I already knew. This affair wasn't just a fling. It had been going on for over a year, maybe longer. I'd found what I was looking for. Now it was time to act. One night, I tracked her to another so-called work dinner. This time, she was meeting G at a cafe, acting as if they were just two colleagues catching up. I took more photos, documenting their intimate body language. It was clear she wasn't going to admit anything until she had no choice. Just when I thought I'd seen it all, her phone lit up with a message that sealed the deal. It wasn't from G this time, but from an unknown number. The message was short, but it was all I needed. "Can't wait to see you tonight." This was it. That message was the final nail in the coffin. I didn't even blink when I read it. No shock, no anger. Just a cold, detached understanding that it was time. Time to end this. Time to stop pretending there was any chance to fix what was broken. Whatever was left of the life we had built together had already been shattered, and now all that was left was to clean up the wreckage. I stared at the phone screen for a moment longer, memorizing the words. "Can't wait to see you tonight." It was the perfect confirmation of what I'd suspected all along, but now it was undeniable. There was no spinning this, no possible excuse she could come up with. She was meeting someone else. Again, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment fling. This was premeditated, deliberate, and cruel. She'd been doing this for God knows how long, laughing at me while I raised what I now knew were probably his kids. My stomach twisted at the thought, but I kept my emotions in check. I couldn't afford to lose it. Not now. I had to stay focused, clear-headed. I forwarded the message to my own phone, along with the rest of the texts and emails I had gathered. There was more than enough evidence now. The pictures, the conversations, the hotel meetings, it was all there, laid out in front of me like a sick, twisted puzzle I had finally put together. I didn't wait to confront her. This time, I was going to do it right. I wasn't going to give her a chance to manipulate me or twist things around. I was going to hit her with everything at once, leaving no room for denial, no possibility of reconciliation. I walked into the living room where Emily sat, casually scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. My phone was in my hand, the message still open, ready to show her the truth she had been hiding. I stood in front of her, and she looked up, her face showing a brief flicker of confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone innocent, like she wasn't expecting anything. I didn't waste time. "I know," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know everything." She froze, her eyes widening just slightly. That's when I knew I had her. There was no hiding it anymore. I know about him. I know about the meetings, the lies. I know about the hotel. I know this has been going on for months. maybe longer. I watched her closely, waiting for her to try and deny it, but she didn't. Not right away, at least. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was scrambling, trying to figure out what to say, how to salvage the situation. "You don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed, but her voice cracked. It was weak, shaky, a desperate attempt to regain control. "You're being paranoid, Dan. You're making something out of nothing." I held up my phone, showing her the text. "You call this nothing?" Her eyes dropped to the screen, and I saw her face pale. She knew she was caught, and there was no way out. For a moment, I thought she might try to plead with me, make up some story about how it wasn't what it looked like. But instead, she just looked defeated. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I didn't want to hear her explanation. "Not anymore." "Don't bother," I said. "I'm done. I've already spoken to a lawyer. This ends now." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "A lawyer? Dan, no, you don't have to do that. We can fix this. We can—" I cut her off. "Fix what, Emily? You think we can fix this? You've been lying to me for years. You made me raise children that aren't even mine. Do you understand what that's done to me? To us?" Tears filled her eyes, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered everything. The late nights, the secrets, the cold distance that had grown between us, and the pity disappeared. "You don't understand," she choked out. "I was going to stop. I was going to end it." "End it?" I scoffed. "You weren't ending anything. You were meeting him tonight. You were still lying, even after everything. There's no coming back from this." She reached for me, her hand trembling, but I stepped back. I wasn't going to let her touch me. "Not now. Not after everything. Dan, please," she begged. "We have a family. We can't just throw it all away." But that was the thing. She had thrown it all away. The family I thought we had, the life I thought we were building together, it was all a lie. She'd destroyed it long before I even knew it was falling apart. "I'm filing for divorce," I said coldly, my voice steady. "And I'm suing you for paternity fraud. You're not going to walk away from this without facing the consequences." Her face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dan, no, please, you don't understand. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. Don't do this." But her words meant nothing to me now. The love she claimed to have for me was hollow, meaningless. I couldn't trust anything that came out of her mouth. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat," I said, turning my back on her. "I'm done." I walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me, but I didn't turn back. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into staying, into forgiving her for something that was unforgivable. The next day I met with my lawyer. He was a sharp, no-nonsense type, and he didn't waste time sugarcoating anything. I laid out everything for him, the texts, the photos, the evidence of the affair. He looked over everything carefully, nodding as he pieced it together. "You've got a solid case for paternity fraud," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The DNA test is clear, and with the evidence of her infidelity, you'll have no problem proving that she deceived you into raising children that aren't biologically yours." I felt a surge of satisfaction at his words. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Emily had lied to me, manipulated me, made me believe in a family that wasn't mine. Now she was going to pay for it. "Good, man," I said, my voice firm. "I want to go after everything. The house, the money, the kids. She's not walking away from this unscathed." The lawyer nodded. "We'll file for divorce and sue for paternity fraud. It'll take time, but with what you've got, we can definitely win this." As I left his office, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I had a plan. I was in control. Emily had destroyed our family, but now I was going to rebuild my life, and I was going to do it without her. That night, I didn't bother speaking to Emily. She stayed in the guest room, and I didn't care. My focus was on what came next. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering financial documents, getting everything in order. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Then came the day I'd been waiting for, The DNA results were finally in. I opened the email with a sense of grim anticipation, already knowing what it would say, but needing to see it in black and white. The results were clear. Jack and Lily weren't mine. I felt a wave of anger wash over me, but I forced it down. There was no time for emotions now. This was just confirmation of what I already knew. Emily had betrayed me, and now there was no going back. I printed the results and added them to the stack of evidence I'd already compiled. The next step was confronting her with it, but this time I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation. I was going to hit her with everything at once, leave her no room to weasel out of it. That evening, I waited for her in the living room. When she walked in, she looked exhausted, like the weight of everything was finally crashing down on her. She sat down across from me, her eyes red from crying. "I got the results today," I said, holding up the paper. Her face crumpled. "Dan, they're not mine," I continued, ignoring her, "and you've been lying to me for years. You made me raise kids that weren't mine. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To them?" She didn't say anything, just sat there sobbing, her body shaking with the force of it. I almost felt sorry for her, but the anger bubbling beneath the surface kept me grounded. This was her doing. She had destroyed everything. "I'm filing tomorrow," I said coldly. "Divorce and paternity fraud. I'm taking everything. You're going to lose the house, the money, everything." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "Dan, please. I didn't mean for this to happen. I made a mistake, but we can fix it. We can still be a family." I shook my head, disgusted. "You destroyed this family. There's no fixing it." She reached for me, but I stood up, stepping away from her touch. "Don't," I warned. "I'm done." I turned and walked out of the house, her cries echoing behind me, but I didn't look back. I had finally taken control, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down anymore. This was the beginning of the end, and I was ready for it. The legal proceedings began like a well-oiled machine. Once I'd filed the divorce and paternity fraud suit, everything moved at a pace I hadn't expected. My lawyer was relentless, and I had no intention of holding back. This wasn't about being spiteful. It was about justice. Emily had lied to me for years, and she was going to face the consequences. The more I thought about it, the more focused I became. The pain had dulled, replaced by a cold clinical determination to see this through. In the days following our final confrontation, Emily barely spoke to me. We coexisted in the same house like strangers, and the silence was almost a relief. She stayed in the guest room while I took over the master bedroom. At first, she tried to plead with me, asking if we could talk, but I wasn't interested. There was nothing left to say. Every conversation would just turn into another attempt at manipulation, and I was done with her games. My focus was on the case. The first real battle came when we entered court. Emily was visibly shaken when she walked into the courtroom. She looked tired, worn down by the guilt and the reality of what she was about to face. She hadn't expected me to take it this far. She probably thought I would forgive her or that I would cave for the sake of the kids. But that wasn't going to happen. Not this time. My lawyer laid out everything in methodical detail. The DNA results proving Jack and Lily weren't mine, the texts and emails between her and the affair partner, the photos of them together. There was no room for doubt. The judge's face remained neutral as my lawyer presented the evidence, but I could tell he was taking it all in. Emily's lawyer tried to downplay the affair, claiming it was a lapse in judgment, but the facts were there. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. She'd been lying to me for years. Emily sat there, her eyes downcast, barely speaking. Every time her lawyer tried to make a case for her, it just sounded hollow. The judge wasn't buying it. He asked pointed questions, digging into the details of her deception, and with each answer, it became clearer that she had no defense. When my lawyer presented the financial aspect, how she had been siphoning money from our joint accounts to cover up her affair, the final nail was hammered into the coffin. She had betrayed me not only emotionally but financially as well. By the end of that first day in court, the mood was grim. Emily looked like she was holding back tears, but I felt nothing. It was as if I had already moved on emotionally, And this was just a necessary step toward freedom. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was simply doing what had to be done. When we returned home that night, she tried again to talk to me. Dan, please, she said quietly, standing in the doorway of the guest room. Can we just talk for a minute? For the kids' sake? I didn't even look up from the papers I was reviewing. There's nothing left to talk about, Emily. The kids will be fine. You should be more worried about yourself right now. She was silent for a long moment before I heard her footsteps retreating back down the hallway. I could imagine her lying on the bed, crying into the pillow, but it didn't matter. Her tears wouldn't change anything. She'd already made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The court battle dragged on for weeks. Emily's lawyer tried to push back against the paternity fraud claim, arguing that I had acted as a father and should therefore continue to support the kids. But the DNA test was irrefutable, and my lawyer was sharp, cutting through every attempt at emotional manipulation. We weren't just fighting for money or custody, we were fighting to set the record straight. These kids weren't mine, and Emily had knowingly deceived me into believing they were. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Emily was ordered to pay damages for the paternity fraud, and while the amount wasn't as significant as I'd hoped, it was enough to send a clear message. She'd lost. She wouldn't walk away from this unscathed. The divorce was finalized shortly after, and the house was awarded to me, along with most of our assets. She was left with very little, a fitting consequence for the years of deceit. But the most significant victory came when the judge granted me full custody of the kids. Emily was devastated. She had tried to argue that, despite everything, she was still their mother, but the court saw through her. Her betrayal had undermined her ability to provide a stable environment for the children, and her affair partner, now revealed to be someone from our close circle, was deemed a negative influence. The betrayal cut even deeper knowing that it was someone we both knew. Someone who had been in our home, around our kids. I remember sitting in the courtroom watching her face as the judge delivered the final ruling. She looked shattered, like the reality of her choices had finally sunk in. I could almost see the desperation in her eyes, the silent plea for me to show mercy. But there was no room for mercy, not after everything she had done. When we left the courthouse that day, Emily approached me in the parking lot. Her lawyer stood off to the side, looking uncomfortable as she came up to me, her voice trembling. Dan, please don't take the kids from me. They need their mother. I looked at her, feeling nothing. They need stability. They'll get that with me. Can't we figure something out? She asked, her voice breaking. For the kids? I shook my head. You made your choice, Emily. Now you have to live with it. She started to cry again, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked to my car, leaving her standing there, broken and defeated. This was the new reality she had created, and I wasn't going to clean up her mess. Over the next few weeks, I focused on getting everything in order. The house was mine, the kids were mine, and I was finally free from the lies that had poisoned my life for so long. Emily tried to reach out a few times, sending long, emotional texts and leaving voicemails that I didn't bother listening to. I'd heard enough of her excuses, her promises to change. None of it mattered now. One evening, about a month after the final ruling, I got a call from my lawyer. He sounded excited, like he had just uncovered something big. I've got some news for you, Dan, he said. You're not going to believe this. What is it? Emily's affair partner. It turns out he's been cheating on her too. And guess what? He's married. I couldn't help but laugh. It was almost too perfect. All that time she had spent lying to me, betraying me, and the guy she threw it all away for was cheating on her too. The irony was delicious. My lawyer went on to explain how they had discovered the affair partner's own web of lies. His wife had found out about the affair and was in the process of filing for divorce as well. It was a disaster, and Emily was caught in the middle of it. She had lost everything, her family, her stability, and now even the man she thought she was leaving me for. When I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of closure. I hadn't set out to destroy Emily's life, but she had destroyed mine. And this was just the natural consequence of her actions. The fact that her affair partner had turned out to be just as deceitful as she was felt like poetic justice. That night, I sat down with the kids and told them about the changes that were coming. I didn't go into the details, but I explained that they would be staying with me full-time from now on. They seemed relieved, and I realized just how much the tension between Emily and me had affected them. They deserved better, and now I could finally give them that. Emily tried one last time to appeal to me. A week after the custody ruling, she showed up at the house looking more desperate than I had ever seen her. She begged me to reconsider, to let her have joint custody, but I wasn't budging. I knew what was best for the kids, and that didn't include being shuffled between two homes with a mother who had betrayed their father. "We can work it out," she sobbed, standing on the porch as I blocked the door. "Please, Dan, for the kids." I shook my head, my voice firm. "You had your chance, Emily. It's over." She collapsed into tears, and I turned away, closing the door behind me. This was the final chapter of our story, and I wasn't going to let her drag it out any longer. With Emily out of the picture, I started rebuilding. I focused on the kids, on creating a stable, loving environment for them, and I wasn't the perfect father, but I was there for them, and that was what mattered. I made sure they knew they were loved, that they were safe, and that nothing from the past would change that. As for Emily, I didn't hear from her much after that. She had moved in with a friend, trying to piece her life back together, but the damage was done. Her reputation was in ruins, and most of our friends had distanced themselves from her after the truth came out. The man she had risked everything for was gone, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had shattered. But I wasn't thinking about her anymore. My focus was on the future, on my kids, on my life, and on finally moving on from the mess she had created. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm I knew was coming. I'd planned it down to the last detail, every move calculated for maximum impact. Emily's betrayal had left me with nothing but cold resolve, and now it was time to see it through. The goal wasn't just to expose her, but to obliterate every piece of her life the same way she'd shattered mine. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just the drive to make her pay for what she'd done. The setup was simple. I'd invited our closest friends and family under the guise of a small gathering. Emily had no idea what was coming. She'd probably assumed this was some awkward attempt at reconciliation. But for me, this was all about the truth. I was about to tear her apart in front of everyone she cared about. I arrived at the venue early, pacing as I ran through the plan in my head. The hall was rented out under the pretense of an anniversary celebration. Ironic, considering what was about to happen. The few who were close to us were invited, and I'd made sure Emily's affair partner, Greg, was also going to be there. He wouldn't suspect anything either. No one would except me. As people started to arrive, I kept it cool. Small talk, handshakes, even a few fake smiles to keep up appearances. But inside, I was ready to detonate the bomb I'd been holding on to for weeks. Emily arrived later than most, looking nervous but still putting on that smile she used to charm everyone. For a moment, I almost felt the old version of us flash before my eyes. The good times, the family dinners, the way we used to laugh together. But those moments were gone, buried under years of lies and deceit. She didn't notice Greg at first. He lingered near the back, his presence quiet but telling. He was trying to keep a low profile, and I could see why. He probably hadn't expected to be in the same room as Emily's husband, but that was part of my plan. The closer everyone got, the more devastating the blow would be. Emily finally spotted him. Her face tightened for just a second, and I caught it, nerves, maybe even fear, but she quickly recovered. She walked over to me, placing a hand on my arm. "Dan, this is really nice. Thank you for doing this." I didn't respond, just nodded. I could feel her trying to gauge my mood, probably wondering if this was some kind of olive branch. Little did she know. The room filled with chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses. It was the perfect facade, everyone oblivious to what was about to go down. I waited until the energy hit its peak. Then I stepped forward, raising a glass. "Can I have everyone's attention for a moment?" I said. my voice steady. The room quieted as people turned toward me. Emily stood beside me, smiling that fake, perfect smile that now made my skin crawl. Greg was off to the side, his eyes darting between us. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, I began. I know it's been a tough year for all of us, but I thought it was important to bring everyone together. Family, friends. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. And the people we trust the most. There was a ripple of agreement, glasses raised in response. Emily's smile widened, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She had no idea what was coming. But tonight isn't just about us, I continued, lowering my voice slightly. It's about truth. It's about confronting the things that have been hiding in the dark for far too long. I saw Emily stiffen beside me, her eyes flicking toward mine in confusion. Greg shifted uncomfortably where he stood, glancing around like he was looking for an escape route. I've been living a lie for years, I said, my voice growing colder. I didn't know it at the time, but my wife, Emily, has been hiding something from me. From all of us. The room fell deathly silent. Emily's hand tightened around her glass, her face draining of color. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. For years, Emily has been having an affair, and not just with anyone. I turned, pointing directly at Greg, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. With him. A collective gasp echoed through the room. People's heads turned toward Greg, who stood frozen, his face a mixture of shock and fear. Emily's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could somehow stop the words from coming out. This isn't some petty fling, I said, pressing forward. This has been going on for years. And to make it worse, she deceived me into raising kids that aren't even mine. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. People exchanged stunned glances, whispering under their breath. Emily's facade was cracking right in front of me, her perfect image shattering into a million pieces. I watched her face as the reality of her actions hit her in full force. Dan, please, she finally managed, her voice shaking. This isn't the place. No, Emily, I cut her off, my voice hard. This is exactly the place. These are the people who should know what kind of person you really are. She started crying then, but I wasn't moved. I had no more sympathy left for her. I looked over at Greg, who had gone pale, his hands shaking as he fumbled off for words. Dan, I didn't mean for this to happen, he stammered. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I turned on him, my voice laced with venom. What did you think was going to happen, Greg? You thought you could just sneak around behind my back and it wouldn't blow up in your face? He couldn't meet my eyes. Emily was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. But I kept going. This was it, the climax. The moment I'd been building toward for months. I trusted both of you, I said, my voice cold and steady. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and you destroyed our family. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Then I delivered the final blow. And to make things worse, I said, turning back toward Emily, Greg isn't the only one who's been lying. The room tensed again. Emily's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face looking at me in confusion. What are you talking about? She whispered. I smirked. Greg's been cheating on you too. Her mouth dropped open in shock, her eyes darting toward Greg, who looked like he wanted to disappear. His face flushed, and he tried to say something, but the damage was done. Emily's perfect world had crumbled at her feet. I didn't need to stay and watch the fallout. It was already in motion. I turned and walked out of the hall, leaving Emily and Greg to deal with the mess they'd created. I could hear the whispers, the murmurs of disbelief, the sound of Emily's sobs growing fainter as I made my way to the exit. Outside, the cool night air hit me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The weight of her betrayal, the lease, the manipulation, it was all behind me now. I had done what I needed to do. I had exposed her for what she really was, and now it was time to move on. As I got into my car, I didn't feel the sense of triumph I thought I might. There was no satisfaction in watching her fall apart. But there was closure. I had taken back control of my life, and that was all that mattered now. I started the engine and drove away, leaving the chaos behind me. I didn't look back. The days that followed felt strange. A quiet sort of emptiness had settled over my life. The house was mine now. The kids were with me full time, and Emily was nothing more than a painful memory. I thought I would feel more, relief, maybe even happiness, but all I really felt was calm. The storm was over, and now there was just the quiet aftermath. Life didn't change overnight. The routine kept me grounded, getting the kids ready for school, managing work, and dealing with the day-to-day tasks of single fatherhood. The kids had adjusted surprisingly well. I think they sensed the shift before it even happened. Maybe they had seen through Emily's lies long before I had, or maybe they were just more resilient than I gave them credit for. Either way, they didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't feel the need to explain more than necessary. Emily tried to reach out a few times. She left long, emotional messages, sent emails, even showed up at the house once, but I never responded. There was nothing left to say. I had cut her out of my life, and that was that. The divorce was final, the custody battle won, and she no longer had any power over me. Whatever guilt she felt, whatever regret was gnawing at her, that was her burden to carry, not mine. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from an old colleague. He had heard about everything that had happened, of course. News like that travels fast in small circles. But this call wasn't about offering sympathy or prying for details. He had an offer. "Dan, I know it's been a rough few months," he said, his voice cautious, "but I've got a job opening I think you might be interested in. It's out of state, but it's a solid position. It could be a fresh start for you and the kids." I didn't say anything at first, just stared out the window, thinking about what a fresh start would mean. A clean break from everything that had happened, a chance to rebuild without the ghost of the past haunting me. It was tempting. "Think about it," he continued. "No pressure, but if you're ready for a change, this could be it." I thanked him and hung up, my mind already working through the possibilities. The idea of leaving town, leaving behind the house where everything had fallen apart, started to make more sense the longer I thought about it. The kids had already lost their mother in a sense, and I wasn't sure if uprooting them would be fair. But they were young, adaptable. And maybe a new environment would be exactly what we all needed. That night, I sat down with them at dinner. It wasn't a big, serious talk, just a casual conversation about what they thought about moving. To my surprise, they were open to it. Jack even seemed excited about the idea of a new school and new friends, while Lily was more reserved but didn't show any resistance. "I think it could be fun," Jack said between bites of his dinner. "I mean, I'll miss some of my friends, but we can visit, right?" "Of course, Ron," I said, smiling. "It's not like we're disappearing." Lily nodded, her big eyes thoughtful. "I just want us to be happy, Dad, wherever we go." That hit me harder than I expected. I realized that the kids had been carrying their own weight of the situation, maybe more than I had noticed. They needed this as much as I did. A new beginning wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. Within a week, I had made up my mind. I called my colleague back and accepted the offer. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of packing, paperwork, and goodbyes. I didn't tell many people about the move. The few close friends I still had understood why I needed to leave. Staying here would only keep me tied to the memories I was trying to leave behind. Emily, of course, found out about the move eventually. She sent another round of desperate emails, begging me to reconsider. In her messages, she painted herself as a changed woman, someone who had seen the light and wanted to fix things for the sake of the kids. But I didn't need to read between the lines to see that this wasn't about the kids. This was about her. She wanted redemption, not for us, but for herself. She couldn't stand the thought of losing everything, and she already had. The final straw came a week before the move. I was going through the last of the paperwork when a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Emily. I almost didn't open it. I didn't need to read more of her pleas, her empty promises, but something made me tear it open. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. The letter was long, filled with regret and apologies as I expected. But at the end, there was something different. She didn't just apologize for the affair. She asked for one last chance to talk, one final conversation to explain herself. She wanted me to understand why she had done what she did, why things had fallen apart. I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling nothing. I didn't care about her reasons. I didn't need to understand her choices. I had already made peace with the fact that we were done. She was no longer a part of my life, and there was no point in reopening old wounds. Without a second thought, I tore the letter in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces in the trash. That was it. The last thread tying me to her was gone. The move went smoothly after that. We packed up our lives, loaded the truck, and left the old town behind. The drive to the new place felt like the beginning of something clean, something untarnished. As we crossed state lines, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the kids in the back seat, both of them quiet but content. The road ahead felt open, endless, full of possibilities I hadn't been able to see before. The new job started off well. It was challenging, but I threw myself into it with the kind of focus I hadn't had in years. The kids settled into their new school, making friends quickly. They seemed lighter, happier. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on solid ground again. But even with all the newness, there were still moments when the past crept in. It's hard to forget a betrayal like that. It leaves scars no matter how much you try to move on. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering how things could have been different, what life would have looked like if Emily hadn't destroyed everything. But those thoughts didn't last long. They were just echoes fading into the background of my new life. One afternoon, a few months after we'd settled into the new house, I found myself cleaning out an old box of papers. Hidden in the bottom was an old family photo. It was from one of those happy times back when I thought we were a real family. Emily was smiling, the kids were young, and I was oblivious to what was brewing beneath the surface. For a moment, I almost felt the weight of that time again, the warmth of the life I thought I had. But then I realized something. I wasn't defined by that photo, by that past. I wasn't the man in that picture anymore, and I didn't need to be. I had grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. The pain hadn't broken me, it had reshaped me. And I was better for it. I slid the photo back into the box and closed the lid. The past could stay there, tucked away where it belonged. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. And for the first time in years, I could finally say that I had moved on. The past was behind me, the future was wide open, and I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. That was enough.